Okay, just to get us started, we're going to just do a quick recap of NASA's history in space exploration. And then we're going to segue into Artemis. Okay, so let's take a look at this quick video that gives us again, a recap of NASA's.
Of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Okay, just checking to make sure you guys can hear me nice and loud. And if you're having any problems, I think the best remedy sometimes is to log out and log back in. That's about the biggest way to kind of perhaps solve the technical issues that you might be experiencing. Take a look now. These few photos that I'm going to be showing you come directly from yesterday. Oh, I'm sorry, not yesterday, this morning, early this morning. And so take a look at these, right? NASA's new era of deep space exploration has officially begun. Okay, with the mighty roar, the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built, the SLS, or the Space Launch System, soared into Florida early this morning on the Artemis 1 mission. Basically, a test flight to send the next generation space capsule to the moon and back. Liftoff occurred today, this morning, November 16th, at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time from NASA's Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Here's another amazing shot. The last time the space agency conducted a test flight of a moon rocket was the mighty Saturn V, and that was in 1967. 2 years later, the Saturn V rocket launched the Apollo 11 mission, sending astronauts to the moon. NASA said that Artemis 1's goal is simple. They're very simple but hard. And a big priority is to show that the Orion's space capsule's heat shield, that it can survive the scorching hot re-entry temperatures that can go up to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Causing, actually, this is caused by the return home from the moon at about 25,000 miles per hour. NASA also wants Orion to demonstrate that it's ready to keep the astronauts alive when they are in lunar orbit. So we're going to be testing all of our deep space transportation systems and communication systems. We'll need to learn more about these vehicles before we put the crew on them. And NASA is aiming to successfully recover the capsule so it can be studied ahead of time before we go into Artemis 2, which will be the first crewed mission or the flight around the moon, which is slated for about 2024. I mean, these images are just amazing, okay? Orion should reach the moon around Tuesday, November 22nd, when it will approach it at about 60 miles. It's going to be 60 miles within the moon's vicinity, doing a flyby, towards its final orbit. And this path actually has a name. It's called distant retrograde orbit, and it will take Orion on a long looping route that it basically will extend it about 40,000 miles beyond the moon at its furthest point. This is actually going to set a record. It's going to set a new distance record for a crew-capable ship that has flown this far. And Orion will hit that milestone at about day 10. And it's going to spend about 2 weeks in orbit before preparing for its trip to come back home. And the spacecraft will look to splash down back to Earth on December 11th in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California. Another beautiful shot. There's also going to be science experiments that's going to be happening aboard the Artemis 1 mission too. So aboard the SLS rocket, there's going to be 10 CubeSats, which will be launched with Artemis 1, and then they're going to be deployed as they are on their way to the moon. And some of their missions actually will vary. Some of these CubeSats will be destined to orbit the moon and seek out the traces of the water ice, while others will test different exploration technologies. One of those CubeSats, called NEA Scout, will use a solar sail to visit a tiny asteroid. This is a picture of the CubeSats, which again are small satellites inside of the Orion stage adapter. This picture was taken over at NASA's Kennedy Space Center as it was preparing for the Artemis 1 launch. Take a look at those pictures. Wow. So as you're looking at those, inside of Orion is a moonican named Commander Campos, which he'll be wearing the new bright orange launch and entry suit that NASA designed for the future astronauts. And then there's actually more experiments that will be happening on board too, like growing yeast and fungus, all to see, how deep space environments actually affect our genes and DNA. This is a picture of some engineers that used the suited mannequins to conduct a vibration test at NASA's Kennedy Space Center on the Orion seats. The moonakins, or the mannequins, will fly aboard the Orion spacecraft during Artemis 1. They're aboard there, and they'll be coming back with interesting data. There is background audio about the launch playing. Oh, I'm sorry. There's some audio playing. Hold on. Let me see. Why is that happening? Something is playing. You guys hear something other than me? No, not from you. Oh, no. It's just, oh, okay. You only hear me. Okay. Okay, I was getting nervous, like, what's happening? Thank you guys for letting me know that. This picture here, these are some pictures of some engineers who used a suited mannequin to conduct vibration testing. And again, oh, that was the last picture. That was this picture. This picture here, this is where the NASA technicians actually loading the moonakins, or the mannequins, aboard the Orion spacecraft. And this happened in July, on July 27th, 2022. And again, the mannequins will measure the deep space environments around the moon during the Artemis 1 launch. And another picture here, the public actually voted to name the mannequins or the moonikins flying aboard the Artemis 1. And they named them after Arturo Campos, whose work led the safe return of the Apollo 13 missions. And so Commander Moonikin Campos is flying aboard NASA's Artemis 1. And he's wearing, again, that orange Orion Crew Survival System suit. This is that same bright orange pressure suit that the Artemis astronauts will use during the launch, the entry, and in any other phases of the Artemis missions. And these last pictures are just some amazing images I just wanted to throw in, again, from this morning's historic launch. And I wanted to say congratulations to NASA and to the United States of America. Let's take a look at the blast off. If you didn't get a chance to see the blast off, let's take a look at it now. We're going to take a look at the blast off from this morning. And I'm going to pull this up for us. And let's be a part of the historic moment.
And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance. Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS is go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2
GLS
seconds.
is go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen
GLS is go
burn-off
for core
igniters
stage engine
initiated.
start.
7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams of Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into
Now that's an amazing video. That video in its entirety is about 11 minutes. But I just love when the NASA commentator said, we rise together back to the moon and beyond. And then if you were watching early this morning, a few minutes later, the Artemis launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, she addressed her team at Mission Control and she said, "This is your moment. We are part of something incredibly special. The first launch of Artemis, the first step to returning our country to the moon and onto Mars. What you have done today will inspire generations to come." And it's just so amazing to be a part of this, us to be a part of the Artemis generation. We are the Artemis generation. And let's talk about that. We are going back to the moon. Literally, it's happening right now. And we're going with the Artemis missions. You know, Artemis is an ongoing space mission that's currently run by NASA. Woohoo! Yes. With the goal of landing the first female astronaut. So we have goals in here. And the first astronaut of color on the moon's south pole before the end of this decade. You know, Artemis in Greek mythology is the twin sister of Apollo, the god of the sun. Right? It was so back in the day, we had the Apollo missions. Well, now we have Artemis. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo, and she is the goddess of the moon. And it's just so appropriate. During this next era of human exploration, we will discover life-saving, earth-changing science and innovative technologies along the way. NASA intends first of all, we haven't had a crewed mission to the moon since Apollo 17, and that was in 1972. So that's over 50 years ago. And then we intend to launch future crew missions to Mars. So this whole Moon to Mars plan involves building a brand new space station that will orbit the moon and eventually a habitable moon base. And when I talk about this space station that will orbit the moon, meet the Gateway. The Gateway will be an outpost that will orbit the moon and will provide the vital support for the long-term human return to the lunar surface, as well as a staging point for deep space exploration. And it's much like the International Space Station, which we know has been in operation for more than 20 years. The Gateway will serve as a model of international cooperation, and it will be constructed with the help of our international partners, several which have already expressed very high interest in participating. And here are some of our international partners: the Canadian Space Administration, the European Space Administration, and Japan. Let's take a look at this quick animation of the Gateway. Every NASA center contributes to Artemis. This is a map of the NASA centers plus NASA headquarters that's located all across our country. But I want to give you a little update. All of our 50 states in the United States have contributed to Artemis. That's great. At the close of today's webinar, you will be able to download a PDF version of today's slide deck presentation and all of the resources and more that you see listed here. You'll be able to do that right within the Adobe Connect interface. But I'm going to give you a link, a Google Drive link, and you'll be able to have quick access to all the resources that I will share this evening with you. Before we came into the presentation today, I shared this video, "We Go as the Artemis Generation," and it's such an inspirational video. You definitely want to share this with your students, because again, one of the key goals, is to send the first woman astronaut. And if you take a look at that image there, we see a woman, right? And so when discussing diversity, we've only had men to explore the moon. And so now this goal again, to send the first woman and the first person of color, and such amazing goals. I'm sorry you couldn't see the map. But when you download the slide deck, you will definitely have access to the map and more. Take a look at the astronauts. These are our Artemis astronauts. NASA selected an initial group of NASA astronauts to help pave the way for our next lunar missions, including, again, sending the first woman astronaut and the first person of color to walk on the lunar surface. And they are chosen from the most diverse group of astronauts in the history of NASA. And the Artemis crews, they actually bring a range of life experiences and skill sets to the missions. Some are medical doctors, marine biologists, submarine officers, test pilots, geologists. That's our astronaut Jessica Watkins. Today, our astronauts, they are conducting flight readiness by training and maintaining those critical thinking skills. I'm talking to those students when we always hear you, when we talk about, we want you guys to, develop those critical thinking skills. Well, this is what they're doing. They're testing those and maintaining those critical thinking skills with activities like robotics, spacewalking, T-38 flight training. And so, they're assigned to fly and go back and forth to the International Space Station. They're getting ready to live and work on the moon. How cool is that to say? Meet Orion. For the first time in a generation, NASA has built a human spacecraft that's designed for deep space missions and that will help usher in a new era of space exploration. And it's named after one of the largest constellations in the night sky and drawing from more than 50 years of spaceflight research and development. Orion will serve as an exploration vehicle that will carry the crew to space. It will provide emergency abort capability. It will sustain astronauts during their missions and most importantly, provide that safe reentry from deep space return velocities. Take a look at it there. It's actually huge. It has about 30% more cubic space than the Apollo capsule, and it's designed to actually accommodate 99% of the human population. And when I say that, it can accommodate astronauts as small as a 4'10" female or as tall as a 6'5" male. SLS. I'm smiling as I'm saying SLS, our Space Launch System. Artemis missions launched this morning from NASA's modernized spaceport over at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, on the agency's new, powerful, heavy lift rocket, SLS, or Space Launch System. And it's designed for deep space. Right now, it is the most powerful rocket in the world. Take a look at it. It has 4 main sections, or, it stands about, first of all, 322 feet tall. That upper stage at the top, the white piece at the top, that's where Orion fits and sits. And that's where the astronauts will be. It will carry the 4 astronauts there to the moon and coming back home safely. that orange area, the core stage, that holds about 733,000 gallons of propellant, part hydrogen, part oxygen, enough to power the four RS-25 engines. And it basically takes it up to space at about 8 minutes, soaring at 17,000 miles per hour, which is amazing to say. Those two white solid boosters there, they stand about 17 stories tall, and they generate 3.6 million pounds of thrust. You know, we are, SLS, Space Launch System, and Orion, they are a part of a larger lunar campaign. So the first phase basically is, the Artemis 1 mission, which we are underway right now. That uncrewed mission with no astronauts aboard. This is, all about testing, NASA's Orion spacecraft, the SLS rocket, and the ground systems over at Kennedy Space Center. We are underway. It's happening. Artemis 1 happening right now. And I'm just going to show you, the trajectory. So after one orbit around the Earth, Orion will fly past what we call the Van Allen radiation belt. Well, it will experience high amounts of radiation. That's going to take about 4 days for Orion to get to the moon, and then once it does that, it will fly about 40,000 miles beyond the moon. And again, this is the furthest that we've ever gone, further than the Apollo missions. And it will spend about 6 days in the vicinity. Matt, I want to go too. That's great, Matt. It will spend about 6 days in the vicinity of the moon before beginning this 4-day return back home. Take a look at this travel plan. I thought this was really neat. So it gives you like a really, really great picture with colors, and so you can kind of, see what's happening. So week 1, this is where we are. We're in week 1 with the launch. Okay. That's that lavender. Okay. And then week 2, it's all about, passing the Apollo 13 record of traveling over 40,000 miles past the moon. So that's going to be happening next week. And then week 3, it's about that voyage home. Okay. That's in the yellow, the voyage home. Okay. And then finally, week 4, that reentry, that's in the red. That's when it's going to be moving at about 24,500 miles per hour. And it's looking to splash down on December 11th, 2022. If you look, I love this site. I just found it today. This is where you can track Artemis in real time. I'm going to put this site in the chat box right now for you. You can literally track Artemis, where Artemis is right now, and it has a really great countdown with the miles it has gone, how fast it's moving. Hold on, let me put it in here right there. There you go. You found this one today too? Okay, Ms. Myers. Yeah. I was like, how do I know what's going on? That was my question to myself. And I said, oh, here we go. And so once you go to the site, also it has like capability where you can maneuver and kind of see around. It's interactive. So it's interactive. You can go in and kind of maneuver and see where Orion is and adjacent to the moon. It's a really great site. So I highly recommend you go there so you can see what's going on and where Orion is, and it is making its Orion is making its Artemis 1 journey. So then we have Artemis 2. Yeah, Artemis 2. Artemis 2 will be a crewed lunar flyby. The first time humans will be at the moon in the 21st century. Okay, and all this is going to be aboard SLS and Orion. And on this 10-day crewed test flight, the NASA astronauts will set a record. They're going to set a record for the furthest human travel from Earth. which is amazing. They will be validating the deep space communications and the navigation systems. They're going to ensure that the life support systems, everything is working to keep them all healthy and safe. We're going to have those 4 astronauts in tow on the Orion spacecraft there. We're going to have that first woman, that first person of color. And again, this is going to be the first time we've been to the moon in 50 years. This will be the Artemis generation's Apollo 8 moment, when the astronauts aboard Orion will capture a full globe of the Earth from afar, as their backdrop, to come back home safely. And this is going to be a huge step, a significant step forward in NASA's return to the moon for that long-term exploration and future missions to worlds beyond, like Mars. Then Artemis 3. Now, we've gained all this confidence with Artemis 1 and Artemis 2. Orion will once again, and its crew will come together, travel to the moon, but this time they're going to board a human landing system. Yeah, and that will bring the first woman and the first person of color to the moon's surface. Back in the day, we had, our astronauts, they landed and they said, this, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I wonder what would our Artemis astronauts say when they set foot? What would those words be? Educators, try that question with your students. I've tried it. And let me tell you, they have some amazing thoughts on what the astronauts might say. And in the chat box, if you have some thoughts, what could those first words be for our generation, for our Artemis generation? What would the first word, what would you say? What would it be? So those are just some interesting way to engage the students. And again, I've done it with kids. I actually did it last week, and I got so many invaluable thoughts. One was the student said, "Hello, world," and I just loved it. So many ideas, that it, again, imagining the possibilities. Each Artemis mission to the surface of the moon. Again, let me go back a little bit. So we're going to the moon to stay. Okay. We're going to be living and working on another celestial body, which is like so important to say, because, at first we had the Apollo missions, the goal was to go to the moon, do a lunar landing, and then come back home. But this time we're going to go to the moon and we're going to stay. We're going to live and work on the moon. We're going to learn what it's like to live, on another planet, in this case, a celestial body. So each Artemis missions, we're going to be testing spacesuits and habitats and landers and systems to help us prepare, prepare for Mars. Because each time we visit the surface, we're going to stay longer. We will live on another world and use what we learn, again, to help us prepare for Mars. Everything we do and what we learn with the Artemis missions will pave the way for our human missions to Mars and beyond. And the students in our classrooms today, I want you to think about this. And I know we have students right now that are on a part of this webinar. You are NASA's Artemis generation. You are our next generation of innovators, explorers, scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians. You will be developing those new technologies that will help propel us to Mars and beyond. Let's take a look at NASA's plan to travel to the moon and beyond.
Three, 2, 1, 0. Mission liftoff.
Artemis 1 will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust, provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis 1 will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
This is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it, so there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon. Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the service module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis 1, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
Initially, what we'd like to do is start establishing a presence on the moon. So we're going to establish going back there on a regular basis, and then we'll end up setting up Gateway, and we would launch to the Gateway, and from Gateway land on the surface of the moon.
We are there for weeks, months on end. And there, we're going to be able to test out all the hardware and the habitats and the hatches and the suits and the rovers that'll allow us to prove out those technologies. The moon will lead the way to Mars, and we should be there within the next couple of decades.
And for more information about the Artemis missions, and specifically Artemis 1, this is your one-stop stop. Explore Moon to Mars website. If you notice here, I have the red arrow there at the bottom. Once you click on that space where you see the red arrow, it opens up to Artemis 1 site. So again, this is your one-stop stop for information on the Gateway, humans on the moon, SLS, videos, pictures, interesting facts, so much more. So check it out. Let's talk about the Gateway. The Gateway is a home away from home for the Artemis astronauts. The Gateway will serve as a multi-purpose outpost, and it will orbit the moon, and it will also provide the essential support for that long-term human return to the lunar surface. Let's look at an introduction of the Gateway.
Home. For me, home is where my family is. But there have been times in my life where I was called away from my family for extended periods of time. While I was serving in the Marine Corps, it was hard to be away from my loved ones. But thankfully, I had my squadron family, but other places where we were stationed around the globe became a temporary home. Then, in 2009, I launched the International Space Station, traveling even farther away from my family, conducting science 250 miles above the Earth. The space station was an orbiting home for my crewmates and myself. Talk about a room with a breathtaking view. With Artemis, NASA will send the first woman and the first person of color to the moon. We are going there for the benefit of all here. We'll need a place to orbit around the moon, where we can live and work, a place to get ready for our lunar surface expeditions, and a place to return to when our work on the lunar surface is complete. We need a lunar home away from home. This will be the Gateway. Starting with the power and habitation modules, the Gateway will be the first long-term outpost in lunar orbit humans have ever had. Primed for new discoveries, this orbiting laboratory will provide us with a unique view of our solar system. And it's already becoming a beacon for the future of international and commercial cooperation in space. With increasing capability and longer missions over time, the Gateway will be a powerhouse of technology and science, paving the way for future human missions to Mars. Design and fabrication of Gateway elements by NASA and our international partners is well underway around the world right now. Wherever you are on planet Earth, today you are part of the Artemis generation. I'm NASA astronaut Randy Bresnick, and I invite you to join us by following NASA Gateway on social media and telling us where you call home.
So, based at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, the Gateway program is building a small human-tended space station orbiting the moon that will provide extensive capabilities to support NASA's Artemis campaign. And it's going to be, again, built with our commercial and international partners. And, Gateway's capabilities for supporting sustained exploration and research in deep space will include docking ports for a variety of visiting spacecraft. It's also going to be a space for the crew to live and work, onboard science investigations to help study human health, life sciences among some areas. Gateway will be a critical platform for developing technologies and capabilities to support moon and Mars exploration for the coming years. And it will be humanity's first space station in lunar orbit. And it will support, again, NASA's deep space exploration plans along with SLS and the Orion spacecraft and the human landing system that will all send the astronauts to the moon. Let's talk about Gateway's orbit, which is very, very interesting because it has a unique halo orbit, which they call is the road less traveled around the moon. Now, take a look at those orbit types over there on the side. A spacecraft in low lunar orbit follows a circular or elliptical path that's very, very close to the lunar surface, completing an orbit about every 2 hours. Okay, transit between the Gateway and the lunar surface will be quite simple because it's in a low lunar orbit, given its proximity. But because of the moon's gravity, more propellant is required to maintain this type of orbit. So, therefore, a low lunar orbit is not efficient in Gateway's planned long-term presence at the moon for at least 15 years. Meanwhile, the second orbit, the distant retrograde orbit, provides a large cyclical and stable pathway, and it's more fuel efficient. And so this orbit will basically circle the moon every 2 weeks. The Gateway, however, the Gateway will gain a stable orbit, but it will lose that easy access to the moon. And the distance will actually make it harder to get to the lunar surface. And then we have our third option, which is the NRHO. Okay. And it actually benefits, with surface access and fuel efficiency. The NRHO will allow scientists to take advantage of the deep space environment, for a new era of radiation experiments. And it will inspire a greater understanding of potential impacts like space weather that it has on people and the different instruments. The NRHO orbit, as we see here, will also give Gateway a continuous line of sight or view of the Earth, translating and also an uninterrupted communication. So we will always have communication with this particular orbit. Let's take a look at this halo orbit really, really quick.
NASA is planning to build a station for astronauts orbiting the moon, a project known as the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway. According to an ESA press release, the Gateway space station will follow a near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO. Gateway will pass 3,000 kilometers from the lunar surface at its closest and 70,000 kilometers at its furthest. One revolution around the moon takes approximately 7 days. The ESA reports that a halo orbit is possible due to the gravitational interplay between the Earth and the moon, which creates a small area of stability or near stability known as libration or Lagrange points. But as NRHO isn't entirely stable, the Gateway will require periodic maneuvering to keep it from drifting off course. The space station is slated for completion in the mid-2020s. According to Space.com, NASA's 2019 fiscal budget request calls for a 2022 launch of the Power and Propulsion Module. 2 additional launches by 2025 will add habitation, logistics, and airlock functions. According to the ESA, Gateway will serve as a staging post where astronauts can dock and leave their spacecraft, then travel to the lunar surface in a lander. It will also provide them shelter, a place to stock up on fuel and supplies and relay communications, and a base to dispatch crew and robots to the moon.
Let's take a look at Gateway's configuration concept. So in a meeting that was held on March 5th in 2019, the International Space Station Multilateral Coordination Board, which is called the MCB, they emphasize the importance of affordable and sustainable exploration. So the MCB members from the United States, Canada, Europe, Japan, and Russia, they all discussed their common interest in deploying a human outpost in the lunar vicinity as the next step. And the Gateway basically will serve as our way station for exploring the surface of the moon. And so the NCB endorsed the plans to continue developing the Gateway and welcomed each agency's intention to seek the necessary approvals for providing the elements and the modules and the capabilities shown, as you see here in this graphic concept of the Gateway configuration. Now, this configuration here shows more details. I really like this one, so I added this one for you guys as to the service that each module will provide, such as communication for robots, any type of robotic missions, high-tech communication that we will need as far as being able to communicate back home to Earth. It also has modules for sample returns from the moon and from Mars that will be delivered to the Gateway for safe processing when we get ready to return those samples back home to Earth. So this is, again, a more detailed configuration map for you as well. And I'm not sure why this is black, but again, a little bit about Gateway. It focuses, it has, for us, we're going to be, there's going to be 2 parts to Gateway that will be launching first. And so NASA has focused Gateway development on 2 elements: the PPE, which is the power and propulsion element, and then the habitation and logistics outpost, which is the HALO. And this is basically where the astronauts will be living and conducting their research while visiting the Gateway. This is a picture of the PPE. So once the Gateway is up and running, the PPE element will provide power. Okay, it will also provide the high-speed communications, the altitude control, the solar electric propulsion, which is the SEP. It will be able to display all of those capabilities. This will allow it to alter its lunar orbit as needed, and actually giving the crew much greater access to the lunar surface than ever possible. This here is another picture of the PPE, which is the power piece. It also can convert that power into propulsion. So, it can be used as sort of like an engine to move the station to different points. The Halo, which is the habitation or the logistics outpost, this module is being supplied by the Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems. This is where, again, where the astronauts will be living and conducting research while they're visiting the Gateway. The pressurized living quarters will provide command and control systems for the lunar outposts, docking ports for visiting spacecraft, such as the NASA's Orion spacecraft, any lunar landers that will be coming and docking. And together, the PPE and the Halo, these two modules will form a workable initial station. And this is a picture of both of them together, the Halo and the PPE. Although the Halo and PPE were initially planned to be launched separately and then docked in space, NASA will now fix the two modules together and fly them on a single launch. And that's scheduled sometime in 2024, and it will be launched on the Falcon, on the SpaceX Falcon heavy lift rocket. This is a really great, this XHAB. XHAB is an academic innovation challenge. And this is a challenge for university students to design solutions to our toughest habitation challenges, from like producing food on the journey in space to recycling breathable air. And so teams can literally, they're actually required to go to a NASA standards assessment system and basically come up with their ideas. And so this is a really, really great challenge to engage students in creating a habitat in space. Let's take a look. We're going to take a quick tour of NASA's Habitat Halo with an astronaut that's going to give us a really great tour of it. So hold on a second.
Hi, I'm Rick Mastracchio, former NASA astronaut and now Director of Business Development for Northrop Grumman's Human Exploration. Behind me is a mock-up of the Habitat and Logistics Outpost, or as we call it, the Halo module. The Halo module and the power and propulsion element will be delivered to lunar orbit to make up the first components of NASA's Gateway. So NASA is currently operating the International Space Station. So what are the differences between the International Space Station and the Gateway? The International Space Station is in low Earth orbit, orbiting the Earth only 250 miles above the surface. The Gateway will be more than 1,000 times further, orbiting the surface of the Moon. The space station is meant as a permanent crew presence, and folks have been living on board the space station for the last 20 years. The Gateway is going to be crew-tended, where crews will visit the Gateway for a period of a few weeks or a few months. The other difference is that ISS is at assembly complete and is home to 7 crew members. Halo and the PPE are just the first components of the Gateway, with plenty of room for future growth. Northrop Grumman has been delivering cargo to the International Space Station using the Cygnus spacecraft since 2013. That's 15 missions and counting. We are now using that Cygnus experience and our lessons learned in the design of the Halo module. Living on the International Space Station has taught me the importance of using all of your space very wisely. The Halo will be in a weightless environment, which means it's a 3-dimensional environment. For example, one crew member could be hanging from the ceiling eating his lunch, while another crew member is back on the wall exercising, while another third crew member could be at this rack performing a science experiment. There is no up or down in space, so we can use all of the volume wisely. Halo is a multifunctional facility. Think of it as a spare bedroom in your house. It will be used for storing cargo, it will be used for performing science, it will be used for preparing food, and will be used to house the crew when they're sleeping. And at times, it will be used for all of those things simultaneously. The Halo module has 3 docking ports, 2 radial ports, and 1 axial port. These ports support the delivery of cargo to the Gateway, as well as the visiting crews. The ports will also be used to grow the Gateway by adding future modules from both international and commercial partners. The Halo module will support the Gateway with power distribution, thermal control, and life support systems, while providing the volume for the astronauts to live and work in lunar orbit. It also acts as a communication relay between the astronauts working on the surface of the Moon and mission control back on Earth. Northrop Grumman is proud to partner with NASA to establish the first permanent human presence in lunar orbit in support of sustained exploration of the lunar surface and onto Mars.
So, because of our time, I'm going to move to the NASA STEM activity that you can use to, help engage students as they learn more about the Gateway. And so Next Gen STEM has standard aligned activities to help students learn more about sending humans to the moon. As you can see, there are 6 educator guides here. They are, aligned to the next generation science standards. And we're going to focus our energies on a particular educator guide called Habitation with Gateway. Which includes 4 standards aligned activities to help students learn about NASA's future lunar habitat, the Gateway. And so they're going to be using science, engineering, and math, and they'll learn how NASA will explore the moon, and then by allowing astronauts to live and work there, and in an orbiting habitat. The educator guide is amazing. As you can see, the format, it has teacher pages, which help introduce the objectives, the process skills, the required materials, the actual design challenge. It offers opportunities to give you strategies on how to motivate students and set that stage for that hands-on learning. And then those NASA mission connections, which are amazing and critical. The student pages are also just as great. It provides students with some background information, suggested steps to take as they go through the engineering design process, data tables to complete, questions to help guide their thinking, and extension questions are also, or activities are also embedded where they can take this NASA STEM activity at home and do some things at home with this particular educator guide. Going back a little bit, we're going to focus our energies on activity 2. As you can see in this particular educator guide, there are 4 activities. This one we're going to hone in on is activity 2, design and build a space habitat. So now that they've built all of their content knowledge about the Gateway and the different parts of the Gateway, and then providing them with videos, now they're going to create and work as a team to design and build a model of a space habitat, and they're going to use the engineering design process to do so. Here you can see the national STEM alignment. Here we have our NGSS, science engineering goals or standards, our technology goals from ISTE, and our mathematic goals from the Common Core. And it also gives you a suggested pace. It takes about maybe 90 to 120 minutes. So you can do 2 full activity periods for this particular engineering design challenge. Then here you can see the STEM disciplines here. You can see where for this particular activity, design and build a space habitat, the physical sciences are addressed, which goes under the NGSS core ideas, the engineering design, the technology standards that it addresses, and then those crucial math standards that it addresses as well. So for this particular goal, the goals of this activity is to apply the steps in the engineering design process and to work as a team as they build and design their own space habitat. They're going to test their design, make observations, and then collect data for analysis. And then the biggest piece of using the engineering design process is all about the improvements, making and improving their model based on the results. So they're challenged. They want to work as a team to design a model of a space habitat using the using the engineering design process. Materials. One thing I love about these educator guides is that materials are always low cost, low budget. materials that you might find around the classroom or might find at home. And this particular activity requires a large variety of building materials that can be obtained from like craft scraps, recyclable materials. You can use your imagination for this particular activity. And it is actually advised to basically start collecting your materials, several days in advance, or even having the kids to bring in, different things that they can use to help build their habitats. Group roles, roles help to divide the work more equally, and it actually reduces the chance that one group member might, take over the challenge. So, assigning group roles or even having the students to self-assign roles, helps to lead and to lead that successful collaborative learning environment that you would like in your classroom. And here are some of the constraints. When we talk about criteria constraints, criteria are those things that need to be done in order for the activity to be successful. And that's the requirements. And then those constraints are those limitations. That could be the materials. They could be the amount of time they have to come up with a solution. And so here, their constraints are that the space habitat must contain 5 modules. They must have a power and propulsion module, a habitation module, a laboratory module, a storage module, and an airlock module, and all with exterior docking ports. And then their airlock must have an external hatch. And so these are those constraints. In addition to those 5 modules, they must, attach a robotic arm. They must have a communications array. Their instrument package, must be something that they need to be able to study, that they're going to study in a nearby planet or the moon. So those are those constraints. And then you have those requirements. They must do a drop test to ensure that all of their 5 modules can withstand the stress. So it must survive that drop test. They must, drop it from at least, 100 centimeters, and to certify that their habitat will be intact. And if any components break off, fall off, the team must think about ways to improve it. And then you have those volume constraints, to ensure that the habitat does not exceed the volume constraint. The entire habitat cannot exceed, 1 meter high, 1 meter long, 1 meter wide. So it has those constraints. And then the structural strength tests to ensure that the habitat stays together in orbit. Their model must undergo a structural strength test. And then once their habitat has been assembled, they must be able to hold it with one hand without any of the modules or the other pieces falling off. And so those are those crucial constraints and requirements that are needed for this particular activity to, be successful. And again, they're following that engineering design process, defining the problem, imagining solutions, and then creating their modules, and then testing it out, doing that drop test, and then taking notes of what's going on, and then coming up with suggestions on how they can improve each of those modules, and also the volume constraints, and then taking them through that structural strength test, using that one hand to pick up their habitat module to see if any pieces fall off, and then finally reflecting on their experience. And I thank you so much for staying a little bit extra. This last slide is all about extension activities that can be done at home, with families. Parents, this is where you come in. I know we have some parents participating today. This Build a Moon Habitat comes from NASA Space Place. It's an amazing activity as well, where you can challenge kids to use some of those leftover activities to create a landing vehicle. Right? And we need a lunar lander, and that will dock with their space habitat. And so, you can add some constraints to that by giving them a budget, and then maybe assign costs to some of the materials that they'll be using. And so this is, again, extension activity that can be done at home. And so I'm going to go ahead and move us to the closeout. And I just thank you guys so much for staying a little bit extra. We did a little bit extra because, it's a special day at NASA today. As someone said earlier in the chat, it's Artemis Day. It's Artemis Day all the way. And right here, you can download about 8 documents here. Number 6 is the actual slide deck presentation. You have all of those slides and more, because I actually didn't get to a few other slides that were still there. And I'm also going to put this link in here. This is your Google Drive link where you could just click on it and you'll have access to all those resources and more. And thank you guys so much. And let's keep watch of Artemis, and let's enjoy this moment, because Artemis 2 is right around the corner. And so thank you all so much. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm available. latina.taylor@nasa.gov. Have a great rest of your week, and happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thank you.